welcome to Washington for the Ingraham angle. This week begins with major stories ranging from, of course, PC insanity to possible terrorism. We're digging to get the real story behind the driver who mowed down pedestrians on a crowded street today in Toronto. Plus, despite the left's narrative that migrants don't come here for handouts, we'll tell you about a shocking new report on the number of immigrants now on welfare. Also, black conservatives are speaking their minds, and the PC police are in total freakout mode. Wait until you hear Tom Arnold's insane rant. And Trump fires back against critics who seem to fear that he might actually make a historic deal with North Korea. But first, Trump versus the GOP again. That's the focus of tonight's angle. When will they learn? More than a year into President Trump's first term, you'd think that all the Republicans would understand that the only way forward is to unify behind the people. It's bringing international foes to the negotiating table, and it's having a positive impact on the economy. But some Republicans cannot help but lend aid and comfort to the president's political enemies. So as Trump slowly but surely begins to remake the GOP to be more responsive to working-class Americans, the globalist wing of the party is still in total denial. And the old guard's resistance to Trump, of course, big shocker, is being amplified by a media machine that's been trying to take him down ever since he first came down that golden escalator. Just watch how uncomfortable some of these Republicans are when pressed about whether they'd support the president again in 2020.
Any Republican senator that hasn't been conflicted over this presidency is either comatose or is pretty useless in their blindness.
You're prepared at this point to endorse the president for re-election in 2020?
I haven't even thought about that election.
You know it's way too early to be
No, it
talking
isn't.
about the 20. Yes,
no,
it is, Chris.
it isn't. Not to say that you support the guy who's president who's the head of your party.
It could be a completely different world by 2020. We have a 2018 election first.
Rather than just rallying behind the president in a show of total unity before the midterms, some in the party end up just giving the media what they want. A storyline about a divided GOP.
The Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln's time is centered in the South. And Trump is a guy from New York, always somewhat alien territory to conservatives.
This reflects division not only within the Republican Party with the approach to Russia, but within his own administration.
Would you rather have the Republican Party of Paul Ryan or Trump? I mean, that's the question right now.
Well, I don't know there's no choice. It's the Republican Party of Donald Trump, which is why Paul Ryan's leaving.
But the truth is, if you want to see real disunity, look at the Democrats. They have no real leader. They've moved so far left, they've left America. And they're reduced now to either silly antics or stammering in their attempts to rile up their base.
It's a scam. The tax bill that gives 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. They try to call it a middle-class tax cut, and yet 86 million middle-class families in the life of this bill will be paying more taxes.
We'll bring in an interpreter next time. Well, the Democrats, come on, they're so desperate. They've now sued the Trump campaign, WikiLeaks, and of course the Russians over Hillary Clinton's loss in 2016.
Donald Trump has been saying for a year plus, this is all about sour grapes. It's all because you lost an election. What says that better than the Democratic National Committee suing them and saying, you lost us this election? So you see people like David Axelrod saying it seems like a waste of time and resources.
Of course it is. The Democrats can't even agree on a political strategy. Tom Perez and the DNC are filing lawsuits while other prominent liberals are just shaking their heads, fretting over their re-election prospects. Senator Claire McCaskill told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that the DNC lawsuit is just a silly distraction. And Congresswoman Jackie Speier, hardly a moderate, she said this.
I actually think this lawsuit is ill-conceived, and I'm not very supportive of it.
That is what real disunity looks like. So beyond all the bluster and all the media attacks on the president, Trump's re-election numbers, check them out. They actually look pretty good. They mirror those of Barack Obama and Bill Clinton at about the same point in their presidencies. Today's Gallup reports that among registered voters, 37% believe Trump should be reelected. That's the same percentage that thought Barack Obama should be reelected in 2010, and at 1 point lower than those that supported Bill Clinton in '94. Big deal. Well, last time I checked, both Obama and Clinton were reelected for a second term, right? Here's another leading indicator that the Democratic National Committee might be in some trouble. Well, they took out a $1.7 million loan in February. So their fundraising, a good measure of voter excitement, is pathetic. Meanwhile, the Republican National Committee took in a whopping $39 million in the first quarter alone. Think that might be because of the president? Well, of course, the president has some work to do. He still has to grow the populist movement, take his message to unfriendly territory, and sell it. That means even in states where he didn't win, grow his base. But while the Democrats are in perpetual teardown and resistance mode, I'm telling you, Trump should be perceived as a doer. He is a leader who will always defy and drain the swamp, will not be defeated by it. That's why he was elected in the first place. All the president needs to do is just stay focused on what matters: growing the economy, returning more power to the people, fighting corruption along the way, and refusing to be distracted or deterred by the constant and tedious demonization game of Washington and the seemingly endless, pointless investigations. I know that's easier said than done, but he needs to do that. Now, listen to all the naysayers you want, but Trump's reelection prospects and those of his party are on more solid ground than the media or his critics would have you believe. And that's the angle. Joining me now for a reaction in New York is Monica Crowley, a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, along with Juan Williams, co-host of The Five. Great to see both of you. Juan, I want to start with you because you wrote a column recently, it came out, I believe, for The Hill, about the GOP disunity, and you cited Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina and Lindsey Graham, who are trying to protect Bob Mueller from any type of firing or other adverse action by the executive branch, by the president specifically. But Tom Tillis has always had a wisdom, in his wisdom tooth, a seed, meaning President Obama. He's not President Trump. He's never liked President Trump. He's terrible on the issue of immigration. He's bad on the trade issue as far as Trump's concerned. So why are we surprised that Tom Tillis and Lindsey Graham, who, you know, they're not populist conservatives, are doing this Mueller deal? That's not surprising to me at all.
Well, it should be. Tom Tillis votes with the president 96% of the time, Laura. And it's not just Tom Tillis and Lindsey Graham. You also have to recall that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee is Chuck Grassley, Iowa, a longtime Trump supporter, and he said he plans to bring this to a vote this week in his committee, no matter what Donald Trump has to say, no matter what the Senate Majority Leader has to say. He thinks this is necessary. And what Tillis said, speaking to other Trump supporters and, you know, evidencing a crack now finally in the kind of uniform stone wall that Republicans have given Trump and made the Republican Party into the party of Trump. Tillis said if Hillary Clinton was in the White House and there was some talk about firing a special prosecutor, the Trump supporters would say it was hypocrisy.
Yeah, but Juan, this is a big fantasy. This is what the liberals have been begging for Donald Trump to fire Bob Mueller. This has been a storyline that the left has been pushing for months and months and months. And Monica, I want you to jump in here because Tom Tillis, who said courage is when you know you're going to do something that's going to anger your base, sitting in his Senate office. The same people who criticized me for filing this bill would be absolutely angry if I wasn't pounding the table if the bill was directed at protecting special counsel looking into Hillary Clinton. I actually am someone who believes that the executive actually has the authority to fire someone in the executive branch. I'm not saying it would be politically wise. I don't think it would be. But the idea that Congress can insulate an executive branch member from firing by the chief executive is frankly unconstitutional. I think Mike Lee is right about this. It's ridiculous. I'm not talking about whether it's politically wise. It's not constitutional in my view.
That's right. We're talking about a separation of powers issue that, frankly, is all of a conversation happening in the media and in Washington, D.C. The same swamp that Donald Trump ran on draining and actually won on draining. If you go into the country, Laura, as you and I do, Juan does as well, the American people are not talking about this. They're not talking about Russia. They're not talking about Bob Mueller. They're not talking about this insane, never-ending investigation. They're talking about the state of the economy. They're talking about the effect of the tax bill. They're talking about jobs, increased wages. They're talking about illegal immigration and the necessity for the Trump wall to be built. They're talking about increased national security, given the fact that this president refuses to appease America's enemies. They're talking about the whole range of issues that directly affect them and their families' lives. They're not talking about these kinds of issues at all. And for the Republicans in the Senate and the House and so on, their real profiles encourage, Laura, right, to be still, at this point, running away from the president who is the leader of their own party.
And Juan, the poll here, the Gallup poll, shows the following. The president had 86% approval rating among Republicans a year ago, and he has 86% approval rating now. To me, that's pretty good. I mean, I don't know. I guess you could have 96%. That'd be great. But 86% is pretty darn good. And I think most Republicans, they know the juice and the excitement is not with Tom Tillis. I don't know. I mean, no, he wouldn't even get arrested. Nobody knows who he is. The juice and the excitement is with Trump. For all of the tweets and everything, they like the fact that he's fighting for the average person. That's why the Democrats don't know where to go. Bernie Sanders says this. Check it out. He said the business model, if you like, of the Democratic Party for the last 15 years or so has been a failure. People sometimes don't see that because there was a charismatic individual named Barack Obama. But his point is, without Obama, where are the Democrats? Where are they?
I think they're fine. I mean, the thing that you missed there in that calculation is that you have fewer people identifying as Republicans. They become swing voters, independents, and the like with Donald Trump in the White House. Right now, it's the case that Donald Trump is at about 39, I think in the Real Clear Politics average, 41% approval, 54% disapprove. That's a real weight going into the midterms.
That's where he was before the election, wasn't it? That's about the numbers he was before the election.
Well, it hasn't gotten much better, if that's your point.
Before the election.
You mean the 2016 election, Laura?
Yeah. I mean, before the election, he was at about a 39% approval, I think. I mean, overall approval rating of all voters. So I don't know how much that means. I know Rasmussen has about 50% in the daily tracking. So, again, polls are polls.
I would say look at the averages, look at the Real Clear Politics average, and he's clearly way underwater in terms of approval.
But my point is, you think Bernie Sanders is wrong? Bernie Sanders is making a point that the working class voters have been left behind by the Democrat Party. He's actually trying to speak to the working class voters, which is why he had these huge crowds.
He's a Democrat, Laura. He's looking to appeal to people and offer a populist appeal that has a lot, actually, a lot in line.
But they went with the Clintons. Went with the Clintons. They went with the Clintons, and they still
are doing the Democratic Party. But I'm talking to you about a populist appeal to the people you are identifying, the working class. And by the way, when you ask the American people, should Robert Mueller be allowed to complete his probe, it's like 70%. There's not even an argument, Laura.
Well, I think the president wants him to conclude his probe.
If that's the case, then why don't the Republicans act to say, you know what, it's the will of the people, let this investigation come to a normal end?
It's not will of the people. It's not their role. Let will of the people. Go ahead, Monica.
This was not the will of the people to have this president endlessly investigated. Yeah. You know, Laura, the president talked on the campaign trail about the forgotten man and woman. This is the working class. These are the disaffected Democrats. You know, it wasn't Republicans who elected Donald Trump. It was disaffected Democrats in the 10 key swing states that elected Donald Trump, and he has been delivering for them. He poses an existential threat to the swamp, the media, the establishment on both sides of the aisle, and that's why they have endlessly tried to attack and destroy him. And when the Russia collusion narrative falls apart, as it's already doing, they will try to find something else. This is a president who puts on a suit of armor every day and keeps plowing through delivering for the country.
There's not one election since 2016 where you say, oh, you know what, Republicans have overperformed because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is actually an albatross at this moment on every Republican from Pennsylvania 18 to Alabama to Virginia governor's race.
Okay, we got to go, guys. We're way over. But thank you. Great segment. But mark the tape. I want that soundbite. I'm going to use that on radio. Remember when the fearmongers on the left warned us that President Trump would isolate us from the world, that would have no friends? Well, instead, what we've witnessed is growing alliances with leaders such as French President Emmanuel Macron. And he's the guest of honor at the president's first state dinner tomorrow night. Let's discuss this and other presidential issues with White House Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley, staying up late. We're delighted he's with us in studio. How you doing, Hogan?
I'm great. How are you?
I just want everyone to see that Hogan has an actual journal. I mean, I love that. You have an actual book, not like a laptop. You're writing down like a real old school, someone who's preparing. I just love that. I miss journals.
Gotta take notes.
I hope you're taking notes on the angle. Tell me about this Macron relationship. I love it because they were all trashing Trump because he was going to offend the world. Now the world wants to come here and meet him.
They thought the Barack Obama apology tour was the way to go about getting friends and allies, and it turns out it's the exact opposite. We're feared again. We're respected again. He's growing these relationships. I mean, France has been with us forever, as you know. One of the actual first trade deals we ever did, quite frankly, was after we signed the Declaration of Independence. It was with France. But he has only gone to make this bigger and better. They are close friends. They talk all of the time. The relationship couldn't be better.
This is the Huffington Post headline in November, Hogan. You're going to love this. Let's look at it. It only took Trump 1 year to trash America's global reputation. And LA Times, May 8, 2017. France's election proves it. America is now example of what not to do. But no one ever calls these people on this stuff. We have this ongoing, okay, so that Max Boot who wrote that? Yeah. Okay, yeah, never Trump, of course, former Republican, now just a liberal.
Of course. Another self-loathing Republican.
Exactly. Well, they're not Republican. They never really were.
Of course not.
But the so-called experts were wrong before the election. And now here they are again. And they just keep having their gigs on TV, their columns in the New York Times, the Washington Post. But this relationship with Macron, getting back to this, he's an interesting cat for Trump to be a pal with. I mean, he's kind of putting the stop signal up for the move in France to put expedited process on removal, deportation of immigrants in France. He's not on board with that. So he's not a populist like Trump is.
Right.
He's more of the globalist, more of a kind of a moderate globalist in Europe. So how do the two have this personal relationship?
Well,
Curious.
There are some similarities, and you heard Macron actually make the comment that he used the phrase "make France great again" just the other day on one of the news networks. I think it was actually Fox.
With a flood of migrants from from Germany.
Well, the point is they were both former businessmen.
Yeah.
No one thought they could win this election. They come in and win. They're trying to do things differently. It is interesting because they don't agree, like on the Paris climate deal. They obviously don't agree on the Iran deal. The president's adamantly opposed to that.
He wants TTIP, that European trade deal, too, which Trump doesn't want.
Exactly. So there are some major differences here, but they just have a really good relationship. They're close personal friends. The president said today on the way to Marine One, he said, we're close personal friend. He's a good friend of mine. So they just have this great relationship.
But Macron wants the president of the United States to stay in Syria longer.
Right.
Until ISIS is crushed. President's instinct and what he campaigned on, Hogan, is that America is not going to stay bogged down in these places where we have no real political solution, a military solution, excuse me. Right. So will that relationship have an effect on the president's ultimate decision to stay in Syria? Everything we know about France's relationship with, sending technology and so forth to Russia, and even its relationship with Iran, the Iran deal. That's what folks are worried about here.
Well, yeah, but I also think a lot of people were worried about when Trump took over as president that this town, Washington, D.C., would shape Donald Trump. The exact opposite has happened. Donald Trump has shaped this town. I think these relationships are similar. Everyone says, what's Trump going to do? Is he going to kowtow to foreign leaders? He does not. He's the best negotiator we have. He comes to the table and tells you what he wants. Of course, he wants to bring troops home, but he wants ISIS to be crushed, and he wants to create an environment there to which ISIS cannot ever rear its ugly head again. And remember, the last administration created ISIS. This president wants to end it.
Well, he shouldn't have signed the omnibus. That was his instinct. He was right on that. That omnibus was not Trump's negotiating. That was Paul Ryan, etc. Hogan, thank you for being here.
Sure.
And up next, the latest on the driver who killed 10 pedestrians in Toronto today. And then stunning new numbers punch a huge hole in the favorable liberal myth that your tax dollars don't support legions of immigrants. Stay there. Alert, the latest on the deadly rampage by the driver who mowed down pedestrians in Toronto today. Police say the suspect is Alec Minassian. They arrested him just minutes after the carnage occurred. At this hour, the death toll stands at 10, with 15 others injured, some in critical condition. Police say that, based on the witness accounts, it was very clear the driver deliberately hit people driving along that the side of that road there. And for analysis, let's bring in former LAPD detective Mark Furman and counterterror expert Aaron Cohen. Gentlemen, another day, another deadly attack on pedestrians, this time in Toronto. Mark, I want to start with you first. Alec Minassian, the last name Minassian is an Armenian name. Armenia is overwhelmingly a Christian nation. So people jumping to Islamic terror, we don't know a lot more yet, except we do know his name. He's 25 years old. And witnesses described a scene where he was deliberately driving into those pedestrians. Your initial reaction?
Well, I would offer this. This is a terrorist act. They terrorized the most defenseless people, out walking, shopping families. It is terrorism. Just because we don't have a computer memory of the suspect, contacts, or a clear declaration by ISIS, it doesn't mean it's not terrorism. This is terrorism, possibly with a mental defect, but what terrorist does not have a mental defect?
Aaron, I want to go to you. Again, we're waiting for more information from the authorities in Toronto, but this is just this was devastating. The men who were interviewed on local Toronto television, they were in tears for what they saw, including children, women, the elderly. Some of them could not speak at all.
Yeah, and I'm gonna partially agree with Mark. He's a master detective and he's been around for a long time, and there's definitely some prints here that closely resemble the mosaic of terrorism. I wouldn't go so far as to directly stamp it as an act of terror, the way we would look at in Israel, and the reason being is I don't see a fundamental or a political or fundamental or ideological motivation yet. You said that the attacker had been reported that he was Armenian. I agree with you. That's predominantly a Christian country. They've certainly been through a lot, the Armenians, but they're not directly associated with terror as we are in Israel with our Mossad and how we investigate terror. But there's no doubt that this guy went to a specific place for a specific reason to do direct death and harm on a crowd of people up at Yonge and Finch, which is a very crowded, popular part of Toronto. I've been in and out of there for the last 2 months doing different training projects. And what I did notice, though, is that the vehicle was rented, which is definitely a terror red flag, Laura. The fact that the individual came out of the car and from what we've heard was waving some type of object around. We don't know specifically if it was a gun or some type of weapon. That's another red flag. But what I will say is the way that you investigate terror, and what I'm not seeing from the Toronto Police Services here, the way you investigate this type of attack at the beginning really sets the tone for a proper terror quality investigation. And if you don't treat it as an act of terror early on, then it affects the tone of how the investigation is carried out. And that's what was concerning me. They were very reluctant to call this terrorism. Whereas in Israel, Laura, everything is a terror attack when it involves attacking a large crowd of people. And then you can deduce backwards. And I don't know if Mark will agree with me, but that's kind of where I come out.
Well, let's listen to what the mayor of Toronto, John Tory, said earlier today, already talking about inclusivity before we know more. And Mark, I want you to react. Let's watch.
This is a time when this community should come together. I hope that we will, as a city, remind ourselves of the fact that we are admired around the world for being inclusive and for being accepting and understanding and considerate.
Mark Furman, the inclusivity word pops up again.
I don't think this is a time to try to include all people and be gracious to all types of religions and thought process. I agree with Aaron totally. Let's handle this as a terrorist act, and I think that's the way the Canadians should be handling this. Handle it as a terrorist act, move backwards. If it is not, you can state it, but if you miss something, trying to move the ball away from it so you can be politically correct, you could miss something that's huge, possibly a whole cell that's completely under the radar.
Aaron, Mark, thanks so much. And meanwhile, another unbelievable story. We're getting a stunning new picture of the burden that immigrants put on American taxpayers, not what you hear from the mainstream media. Figures from the Census Bureau, analyzed by the Center for Immigration Studies, show the percentage of new immigrants receiving food stamps has nearly tripled in the last 10 years. And the number of immigrants on Medicaid has gone up almost as much. The author of the study, Steve Camarata, joins us in the studio, and columnist Paul Reyes is in New York. Gentlemen, great to see both of you. Steve, here are some of the key findings. New immigrants remain twice as likely to live in poverty as natives. New immigrants on Medicaid increased by 11%. The share of new immigrants living in households receiving food stamps, as we said, tripled. That's from 2007 to 2017. The phrase new immigrants are people who have been in the United States for 5 years or less. The critics will say, well, you know, you're using inappropriate controls. The Cato Institute already coming out and criticizing the study that you exaggerate the cost of immigrant welfare use. Well, that was actually from last year or 2 years ago, but they're going to say that.
Yeah, that's right. Look, one of the interesting things is immigrants who are coming are much more educated. Used to be about a third of new immigrants. These people who've been in the United States for 5 years or less. Used to be the case about a third had a college degree. Now it's about half. So we thought that if immigrants became more educated, they'd do a lot better. But in fact, what we found was they're still about as likely to live in poverty, these new arrivals, and use welfare rates have gone way up, and their average income is not higher, and the share who actually have a job is quite a bit less, both in absolute terms and relative to native-born people. So they're not doing as well, even though they are a lot more educated. It's a very puzzling finding.
Raul, look, I think Americans are very generous and welcoming and compassionate, and yet we do have an enormous problem in inner-city America still with homelessness among veterans, fatherlessness, broken homes, the opioid crisis. There's a lot culturally, socially, economically we're dealing with. So how do you refute what Steve says about just the trajectory of government dependence on the part of new immigrants?
Well, I would say I do not necessarily refute what Steve is saying. I look at his data points from a different perspective. For one thing, as you touched on, we're talking about new immigrants, which, as he defined, people who have been in this country for less than 5 years. Now, just as in general terms, I would encourage you, ma'am, or many of the viewers to think back to, say, when they first graduated from high school, after they first got married, their first few years out after college. For most people, those first 5 years of when they were starting over or beginning a new phase of their life wasn't necessarily an indicator, a successful indicator of what their life's trajectory was going to be. So we may see some undocumented and legal immigrants on government services, but that's not a reflection of the long-term trends. And second, these are obviously, it's a contentious issue. People have very strong opinions on both sides. But just as a point of law, our government, our Congress made certain policy decisions. For example, the government decided that with programs, for example, like the Children's Health Plus health insurance, or things like food stamps for children, that they were available to all children regardless of immigration status. So when we do see immigrant and undocumented people using these, they are entitled to by law.
We get all that. We're entitled to by law, but we're trying to have a conversation based in facts, because what we hear on immigration, and I hear what you're saying, but when we talk about immigration, a lot of people get the sense that all new immigrants coming to the United States are either going to be the valedictorians of their class, they're going to be rescuing cats from trees, they're going to be coming up with a cure to cancer. Maybe some of them actually will, and that's fantastic. But overall, we have to make some hard choices. We only have a certain, a limited budget. We have a lot of obligations to our elderly, to our sick and poor who are native-born. So the question is, how do you divide up those dollars? And Camarata, you can respond now to Raul's comment.
Yeah, look, I mean, the bottom line here is that we know that about half of all immigrant households are using the nation's welfare system, and that's those who've been in the United States on average 20 years. Welfare use does not go down over time. It tends to rise.
Are you talking about real welfare? Are you talking about Social Security? Are you talking about Medicare?
No, we're talking about all programs, cash programs, Medicaid, the health insurance for the poor, food stamps, public housing. If we look at all that, 51% of immigrant households who've been in the United States for 20 years access that program. It's about 30% for the native-born. So that really is a problem. And it isn't just a problem for new immigrants, and that's been getting worse. It's a problem overall, including for the well-established.
Raul, you can respond. Last word.
Sure. Going back to your point about the facts, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, for example, which administers the food stamp program, they pointed out last year that immigrants make up about 9% of our population, and yet the percentage of people who are receiving food stamps of the immigrant population is only 4%. So right there we see their immigrants are using these services at disproportionately low levels relative to their overall numbers. And there have been lots of other bipartisan studies that confirm these types of results.
All right, guys, thank you so much.
No,
fantastic segment. And by the way, liberals' heads are exploding as Kanye West commends a black conservative. You want to know what really seems to terrify a liberal? A black conservative, especially a black conservative speaking his or her mind. The most recent example began when hip-hop superstar Kanye West tweeted on Saturday, "I love the way Candace Owens thinks." Who's Candace Owens? Well, she's a popular conservative commentator. And that set off liberal Twitter, with comedian Tom Arnold tweeting something so profane, even he ended up deleting it. A comedian deleting something from Twitter because it's obscene? Well, that's when you know things have gone totally out of hand. Let's discuss the perils for black conservatives speaking their minds with Fox News contributor Kevin Jackson in Phoenix and former Hillary Clinton campaign staffer Michael Starr Hopkins in New York. Great to see both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start with you, Michael. I watched the Candace Owens speech, and I think we don't have time to play all of it, but she basically was given a talk on a college campus where she said, think for yourself. You're not a victim. Don't act like a victim. You can do whatever you want. You have two hands, you have 2 feet, you have your eyes, you have your mind, you have your independence. You're not owned by any political party. That was basically her message. And Kanye sends a tweet, I like what she's saying. He was strafed all over by Hollywood, the entertainment industry, and more. Why is that the right reaction to intellectual, ideological diversity?
Well, let me start with Kanye, and then I can talk about Candace Owens. Kanye West, the reason that people are laughing at Kanye is because of the intellectual dishonesty here. On one hand, when Kanye West said that George W. Bush didn't care about black people, conservatives were in an outrage. Now that Kanye West says that he loves Trump, now he's conservatives' love child. I think that's the first problem. But when it comes to Candace, let me talk about a different issue with Candace. My issue with Candace is that she wants to rewrite history. She wants to ignore the history that got us to where we are today and walk all over the civil rights icons that allow her now to be able to say the things that she does.
She wants to walk all over it? What are you talking about? She wants to walk all over civil rights icons?
Yeah, absolutely. By saying that African Americans are whining, by saying that Black Lives Matter activists...
She's not saying everybody. She's saying, and she was very upbeat. I thought she was really positive. I don't know her at all, by the way.
I've seen multiple clips of Candace, and I'm not talking about just the Black Lives Matter speech, but things that she said on Hannity tonight, things I've heard her say before. I mean, let's be frank.
The left says all sorts of horrifically hateful things about people 24/7. A black conservative gets up and says, think for yourself. And she might as well be Hitler.
It's Armageddon.
I mean, honestly, what people are saying
but
about
I also get to criticize her.
You
and I think that what she's doing is being disrespectful.
Hey, Laura, I'd like to jump in here.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I'd like to jump in here. First of all, I'm proud that you were able to find somebody that wants to come and argue that black people should be monolithic and all think the same. And how dare Kanye West actually stand up for Candace Owens today when he said something different about George Bush? George Bush was a very different person. Kanye West can have an opinion that differs over time, just like anybody else.
Okay,
and standing up for Candace, who said nothing Candace said. By the way, the college campuses would never let me or Larry Elder or some of the people on. I'm shocked they let Candace on, because with all due respect to her, I would go teach those kids a lesson that they'd never forget. And
why? Nobody's scared of you just because you're a black Republican. I have friends and family that are black Republicans. You are a perfect example, as you sit here and try to talk over me, you're a perfect example of a person who comes on here and says, it's what she says. Candace has an opinion that most blacks in America agree with, that we are individuals. We are not monolithic. We don't vote Democrat because people like you decide that's what we're about. Oh, Laura, here's an interesting thing. I'll come off this segment, and there will be more white people that will call me a race traitor, along with the cadre of blacks. And I'll get off here and get called all kinds of racial slurs by Republicans. Race traitor because I don't want to toe the line. Look, the day what Candace is exposing is the day of Democrats demagoguing the political spectrum and having black people go for this nonsense when it's gotten us nothing. Those days are over.
Then why can't Republicans... Okay, hold on, Michael. I'll let you respond. I just want to play a soundbite. I mean, it is an amazing radio talk show guy, a radio host named Ebro, commenting on all this. And Michael, maybe you can respond. Let's watch.
Absolutely. Multiple times through the conversation, he said, I just want to lead with love. I just want to be about love. And I said, you're a liar.
You're a liar.
Because the people you're aligning yourself with aren't leading with love. Kanye West, quote, I love Donald Trump.
Obama's right. You are a jack. And you showed it again this weekend.
Your reaction, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any disagreement with that. I mean, look, you can't say you want to lead with love. Because you can't say you want to lead with love and then have a president who says that African countries are a word I won't say on air, that when people are protesting, when white supremacists are protesting, that they're part of the good guys.
You're just talking point central.
Talking point central, how do you...
Have you been to Africa?
Let's be honest here.
I've been to 22 countries in Africa. My bet is you've never been to one of them.
Why can't Republicans break 10%?
Donald Trump was exactly right. Let me tell you what's going to happen. Donald Trump's going to get more of the black vote. And first of all, we're going to get it in 2018 and shock the daylights out of you. Then in 2020, he's going to get more of the black vote that's going to absolutely put this over the edge.
7%?
Who cares?
No, he got 9% last time, which is better than Mitt Romney got.
Laura, let me tell you, the problem with guys like him is it doesn't matter. You know what's funny about this? The conversation this man is having right now is he's saying, I don't want black people to even consider voting for Donald Trump. You know what they'll also do? They'll say, I don't want black people to think Donald Trump's worth anything, and then they'll criticize him because he doesn't have black people on his cabinet.
I take Donald Trump I take Donald Trump at his word. Donald Trump, throughout his entire career, whether it be the Central Park Five, you can say it's nonsense, but you know everybody has a job to do, and I'm sure that
unemployment rate among African Americans, I believe, in history. More opportunity, more manufacturing. Take it away from race for a second. Take it away from race for a second, Michael, we have more economic opportunity coming into America today because of what he's done. That will do more to lift people out of poverty, give them opportunities than anyone. And you tell me that stopping illegal immigration, flooding the inner city with drugs and guns isn't going to help minorities?
This is a joke. You guys actually, with a straight face, believe that Donald Trump is good for black people and racial relations.
Yes.
Kevin, you honestly believe that?
Yeah, as a black person, I will tell you that he is.
Because he's breaking the stranglehold that the Democrat Party has on certain minority voters.
Respect for black
and you take
people,
them for granted,
community.
and you know you do.
You know
you're afraid
Kevin,
of them.
Black people are being used by Donald. People like you are being used by Donald Trump.
We gotta go, guys. We're out of time. But
how's it feel?
Michael and Kevin,
Hillary Clinton,
you're both really smart, and unfortunately we're out of time. But I'd love to have you back on radio. I'd love to have you both back. But thank you, both very well informed. And we're going to have another shocking example of liberal censorship on campus coming up in our Defending the First series. Meanwhile, President Trump is responding to the critics of his planned summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. We're going to tell you what he said, and a top foreign policy expert weighs in next. President Trump fired back at critics who claim that merely meeting with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un would be a major concession. The president tweeted, "Wow, we haven't given up anything." Meanwhile, Kim recently announced he's suspending missile and nuclear tests. Let's discuss the meeting's prospects for success with Time Magazine foreign affairs columnist Ian Bremmer. His new book, Us Versus Them, The Failure of Globalism. I have my copy tabbed, Ian. Comes out tomorrow. Look, you can tell I'm still in my mind in law school. I actually have yellow tabs on your book.
I appreciate that.
Ian, it's great to have you on. This really is, I think with all the investigation mania going on and all the daily, food fight we see in Washington, this could be an unbelievable development. And there's a lot of ifs. But for the president not to get even a modicum of praise or respect for the fact that we're at least taking a different approach to North Korea with all the predictions of global unrest, and he's going to start World War III. This is something. This is quite something.
Trump clearly deserves credit on this. I mean, it was the fact that he was willing to push hard that brought the Chinese to the table, supporting U.S.-driven Security Council resolutions and squeezing them on sanctions that concerned the North Koreans. It got them to show up at the Olympics. It got them to be willing to engage with the South Koreans. The Chinese have summits that they had never had before, and also agree to suspend missile testing and nuclear testing without offering anything from the United States. Now, we have offered them a summit. They want that. It provides legitimacy. But if you ask who's done more bending so far, the North Koreans or the United States, it's clearly the North Koreans. That's very far from saying we're going to get to denuclearization on the part of Pyongyang, but absolutely there's more of a chance that we see a breakthrough today than there was 6 months ago.
Now, you made an interesting tweet. You sent an interesting tweet about the Nobel Peace Prize. Tell us.
Well, only the fact that if it were true that Trump was able to actually not only get the North Koreans to the table, but come to a resolution that actually got us away from nuclear missiles pointing at each other, that he'd deserve a Nobel much more than Obama did when he got at the beginning when he came in and didn't do anything. I mean, it's a politicized prize. We've known that for a long time. I do believe that there's more of a chance that we end up blowing each other up, but I also think there's more of a chance that we get to a real resolution. And I think people need to understand that that so far on North Korea, the signs have been more positive than negative.
Yeah, I mean, for the madman theory or whoever it was, they're calling him Rocket Man. And I mean, the Democrats, let's just play a few of these sound bites. The Democrats have gone absolutely bonkers leading up to this announcement about the summit. And I think we have some of the elements. Let's watch.
One of the things we've discovered about this new president is he has no clue about how to deal with foreign matters. He's dangerous, and he should not be talking with this kind of bluster. And I'm hopeful that somebody at the White House will pull his coat and tell him to stop it. This is not the way to lead this country.
He is doing none of the things necessary to achieve a real diplomatic breakthrough on North Korea.
This is a mess that North Korea has created, but President Trump has made it more difficult to deal with.
Ian.
Look, he's made mistakes on foreign policy. North Korea so far is not one of them. Again, we've had both a Democratic and a Republican president over the course of the last decade that's allowed the North Korean situation to only get worse. More nuclear capabilities, more missile capabilities, more cyber capabilities. Finally, we get the Chinese to the table. We get the North Koreans to the table. On balance, since Trump has come in, despite the fact that he doesn't have foreign policy experience, we have more opportunities with the North Koreans than we had before.
Ian, I want to talk about your book, which I've been able to read bunches of. You grew up in Chelsea, Massachusetts, and you talked about how in Chelsea, it was, middle-class area, and how people now, like many parts of the country before Trump, I think especially, people are angry because they feel like no longer is it just hard work and an education, and you're guaranteed to get ahead. The globalization people feel has failed them. Worried more about other countries than it did what was going on here at home. Tell us.
Well, I wish it was a middle-class background. That would have been aspirational. It was the projects. It was a working-class background, and there were no globalists. There were no capitalists that I grew up with because they had no capital. And I think the reason why so many people are willing to vote against the establishment in the United States is because they feel like both on economics, on culture, on security, on technology, on every issue that the establishment left and right has been talking about, that they've been left behind. And I've seen a lot of people over the last year and a half been willing to blame Trump for the us versus them that we are facing right now as a country, when in reality, us versus them is responsible for Trump.
Take about 20 years for us versus them, 25 years, I'd say. The book is Us Versus Them. Ian, come on radio this week. Sure. Really interesting read. We really appreciate it. Yep. And you're not going to believe, by the way, the lame excuse the colleges came up with to silence it. Have you ever... Oh, I love this section. It's called Defending the First Series, where we expose the enemies of the First Amendment, free expression, and free thought. The latest target of campus censorship and the epidemic there is renowned history professor emeritus Bert Folsom of Hillsdale College. An approval committee at Davidson College in North Carolina tried to ban him from delivering a lecture on campus. The committee's excuse? Well, they claim the lecture would not be academic enough. Let's bring in Spencer Brown. He's the spokesman for the group that invited the professor to speak, Young Americans for Freedom. We have other stories to get to as well. They ultimately, Spencer, allowed him to speak on campus, but not at that particular venue, which is bigger, and they put him off to the side somewhere, and they said, well, you can speak over here, the unwashed professor. What's going on?
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I don't think it's any secret to you or your viewers that there's a real crisis in ideological diversity on college campuses. But what surprises us continually is the excuses that liberal administrators use in order to shut these speakers down. So here we have Davidson College telling us that Bert Folsom, who's at one point had the #1 best-selling history book in the country, is not academic enough to speak on the main part of their campus. It's just ridiculous.
Well, it's a fraud. And there's another hilarious story. Campus Reform went out and they decided to interview students about sending troops to the border and immigration and so forth. Let's watch.
When President Obama did it, I felt that there was, I suppose, different coverage as to what the intentions were.
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
On who can be here or not, basically.
Yeah.
At a border, I think most people would say.
Yeah, well, the students didn't know that President Obama had actually sent troops to the border. And so they're like, well, when he did it, what is your take on the lack of just basic understanding of whether it's the Constitution or just basic recent American history? It is a constant demonization of Trump or the propaganda machine on college campuses for like 50 grand a year, a lot of these places.
Yeah, well, that's the real tragic part, is these are students who are going to school allegedly to get an education, become well-rounded, and instead they're not learning critical thinking skills, they're not learning how to defend their ideas, they're just being fed this pablum of leftist ideology. And so what you see here is these students who don't know why they may support or oppose this policy. All they know is if Trump supports it, it must be bad. Whereas if you had asked it the other way around, if Obama had supported it, they'd say it was the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah, so that was at UC Santa Barbara. And so, but what you didn't show in this video is before, they didn't know that Obama sent the troops to the border. So they kind of like had to back into that. Oh, well, when he did it, it was necessary. It's just, I mean, it's classic. This is classic uninformed, God bless them, uninformed college students who learn it for the first time from some radical professor, a radical history professor. Then at GW University, right nearby where we are, the Democrats, some of the college Democrats are not participating in some type of bipartisan discussion summit last week. They don't even want to be bipartisan.
Well, it looks like basically the leftists are showing their true colors, and that is they don't want a dialogue. They don't want the free and open exchange of ideas, because they know when that happens, the best ideas rise to the top, and the flawed ideas, the left's ideas, will fall off. And so what you see here is basically their goal is to allow a situation only where leftist ideas are heard, because they know when conservative policies and solutions are offered, those are going to be the ones that students pick. Right? They don't have a choice.
They're petrified of a debate. I've never seen anything like it. They are the pusillanimous. They're petrified. And by the way, they said some members of the current executive board have hesitations about participating in events with conservative orgs.
They're scared.